Welcome to Podcog, the channel where we explore the science behind what makes us who we are. If you're fascinated by the workings of the human mind, you've come to the right place. Here we dive deep into cognitive neuroscience and psychology, uncovering both classic and cutting-edge studies that reveal the secrets of how we think, feel, remember, and perceive the world around us. In each video, we break down famous experiments, from timeless psychology cases to the latest neuroscience research shaping our understanding today. We'll explore intriguing questions like, what drives our behavior? How do memories form and change? How do emotions work? And how do our brains navigate this complex world? Whether you're a student, a professional, or simply curious about the mind, our channel is designed to make complex science easy to understand and exciting to learn. So, hit subscribe and join us on this journey through the mind and brain, where every episode brings us closer to understanding the incredible machine that is the human mind.
Welcome back to Podcock. As always, we're diving into some really fascinating research in cognitive neuroscience.
Absolutely.
And today, we're looking at a paper that really kind of made some waves, you know? Telling more than we can know. Verbal reports on mental processes.
Oh, yeah.
It was published way back in 1977 by Richard E. Nisbett and Timothy DeCamp Wilson. Have you had much experience with this paper?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic, a landmark study, really. It kind of challenged how we think about introspection.
Okay.
Like how much we really understand why we think or feel or act the way we do.
Yeah, even the title is kind of intriguing, right? Telling more than we can know. It suggests this gap between what we think we know about ourselves and what's actually happening in our minds.
Right. Like, we think we know ourselves so well,
Right.
but maybe we don't. That's what Nisbett and Wilson were getting at.
So what were they actually saying? Like, were they saying that we're just making stuff up when we try to explain our behavior?
Kind of, yeah. They were suggesting that maybe we don't have as much insight into our own thought processes as we think we do.
Okay.
And so when we try to explain our behavior, we're not really giving the real reasons.
Okay.
We're basing it on assumptions and biases. We create narratives, but they're not accurate.
So is it kind of like we're just guessing at our own motivations?
Well, not just guessing, but constructing these stories. And they sound plausible.
Okay.
They fit with our pre-existing beliefs, like cause and effect. But they might not actually be the real reasons. Yeah.
So that's kind of unsettling, right?
Oh, it's definitely unsettling. It makes you question whether you're really the best judge of your own character.
Right. You think you are, but maybe you're not.
Exactly. And what makes this paper so interesting is that they don't just talk theory.
Okay.
They actually back it up with evidence from all sorts of fields, from psychology to even anecdotes from creative people.
Oh, wow. So they really did their research, huh?
Oh, they did. They pulled from cognitive psychology, social psychology, memory research, all sorts of stuff.
Wow. So this isn't just some one-off study.
Right.
This is like a synthesis of all these different research ideas.
Exactly. They really built a solid argument. And to make their point, they talked about some intriguing experiments, like one with a placebo pill and electric shocks.
Oh, that sounds kind of scary.
Well, in this study, they told people they were taking a pill that would make their heart race and sweat, but it was just a placebo.
Oh, okay.
Then they gave them electric shocks.
Oh, geez.
And asked how much it hurt.
Okay.
The people who took the placebo, they handled way more shock.
Really?
Yeah, 4 times more, in fact.
That's crazy. So just thinking they were going to have those symptoms made a huge difference in how much pain they could tolerate.
Exactly. They blamed their reactions on the pill, not the shocks.
Wow.
Even though they said they weren't even thinking about the pill.
That's wild. So their belief about the pill really messed with how they felt the pain.
Exactly. And this shows how much unconscious stuff is going on, influencing our experiences.
It makes you wonder, how many other things we're totally misinterpreting without realizing it.
It's kind of scary, right? There's another study with snakes. They made people think they weren't afraid of snakes by messing with their heart rate feedback.
Wait, they tricked them about their own bodies?
Yeah, and these people, they actually started to believe it and got closer to a boa constrictor.
Oh my God. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So they changed their behavior, but their conscious beliefs stayed the same.
Right. It's a mind trip, isn't it?
Seriously. And it's making me question everything I thought I knew about myself.
And they talk about another study with a story about a drowning baby. They found that adding extra details didn't actually make people feel more emotional.
Like what kind of detail?
Like about the baby's messy crib or how it looked.
Oh, man. But you'd think those details would make it even sadder.
You would, right. But the results were the opposite. But the people still insisted those details made it more emotional.
So basically, we make up reasons to explain our feelings, even if they're not real.
That's one way to look at it. And this leads to a big idea in the paper, the thing called the representativeness heuristic. They got it from Tversky and Kahneman.
Oh, the behavioral economics guys.
Hmm.
I know their work. But remind me, how does this heuristic work?
It's like a mental shortcut. We judge how likely something is based on how well it fits our stereotypes.
Oh, I see. So we cling to explanations that sound right, even if they're not. Like with the baby story, the messy crib fits the idea of a tragic situation, so people assumed it had a big impact.
Exactly. We're always trying to find patterns to make sense of things, but sometimes our brains take shortcuts that lead us in the wrong direction.
It's kind of scary how easily our own minds can trick us.
It is. But who are these guys? Nisbett and Wilson. Were they like big names when this paper came out?
Yeah, good question.
Well, back then, in '77, Nisbett was already making a name for himself at Michigan in social psychology. And Wilson, his student, went on to do some great work at Virginia. They weren't super famous yet, but this paper definitely put them on the map.
Yeah, I can see why this whole idea is so groundbreaking. So they made this big argument, but did they actually do their own experiments too?
Oh, yeah. They weren't just reviewing other people's work. They did a bunch of clever experiments to test these ideas directly.
What kind of experiments did they do?
Well, one was pretty simple. They put things like nightgowns and stockings on a table, all the same quality. They asked people to pick the best one.
Okay.
And guess what? People consistently chose the one on the right.
Really? Just because of where it was?
Yeah, but when they were asked why they chose it, none of them mentioned the position.
Wow. So something as simple as where it was on the table totally influenced their choice, but they had no idea.
Exactly. They talked about the material, the weave, anything but the position. And when asked directly if the position mattered, they denied it.
Wow. So they were completely blind to the real reason they picked what they picked. Like their minds just invented an explanation that made sense to them.
It's amazing, isn't it, how we can be so unaware of what's really driving our choices.
This is blowing my mind.
It is, right?
Did they do any other experiments?
Oh, tons. For instance, they had people watch a movie,
Okay.
but they messed with things. Some people had to watch with a loud noise, others with a blurry picture.
Okay.
And guess what? The distractions didn't actually change how much they enjoyed the movie.
Really? So they thought it would bother them, but it didn't.
Exactly. But when asked, a lot of them, especially the ones with the noise, said it did affect them.
So again, they thought something mattered, but it actually didn't. It's like we're experts at convincing ourselves that things are a bigger deal than they are.
We are. We're always trying to find explanations for why we feel the way we do. And we're good at it.
Yeah.
Even if those explanations aren't true.
So if we're so bad at this introspection thing, is there ever a time when we're actually right about why we do things?
That's the big question. And they do have some good news. They think we're more accurate when the reasons are super obvious and fit with what we already believe.
Okay. So if it's like right in front of our faces, we're more likely to get it right.
Yep. And also when it's something we're taught by our culture.
So like if everybody agrees that something's important, we're more likely to notice it.
Right, like learning to drive. Everyone knows speeding is bad. So if you got in an accident while speeding, you probably realized that your speed had something to do with it.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear connection. But is that really introspection?
Good question. They say that even in those cases, it might just be that we're remembering what we've been taught, not really looking inside ourselves.
So even when we think we're being all introspective, we might just be repeating what we've learned. That's a pretty humbling thought.
It is. And it makes you wonder if there are other studies in the paper that show this even more clearly.
Let's talk about that after a quick break.
So we were talking about how even when we think we're looking inward, we might just be repeating what we've learned from our culture.
Yeah, like we're just kind of parroting what everyone else says.
Right. And to show this even more, they looked at research from a bunch of different areas.
Okay, like what?
Well, they talked about studies on subliminal perception, where people are influenced by things they don't even see. That shows just how powerful these unconscious influences can be.
That is kind of freaky.
Yeah.
Like there's this whole other level of stuff happening in our brains that we have no clue about.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, are we really in control? They also brought up Mayer's experiment, the one from 1931 with the cords.
Refresh my memory. What was that one?
People had to tie these two cords together in a room full of stuff.
Okay.
Most of them couldn't figure it out at first. But then Mayer, he subtly hinted at the solution.
Okay.
And a lot of them figured it out after that.
Oh, Okay, so what happened when he asked them how they did it?
Most of them didn't even remember the hint. They thought they were just like super smart and figured it out themselves.
Oh, wow. So even when we're actively trying to solve a problem, we might not even realize what helped us get there.
It's like our minds are always looking for an explanation, and if we don't know the real reason, we just make something up that sounds good.
So we're basically just telling ourselves stories all the time.
Pretty much. And those stories can be pretty convincing, even to us.
Makes sense.
And then they talked about Latane and Darley's work on bystander intervention, the whole bystander effect thing.
Yeah, where people are less likely to help if there are other people around. Didn't they find that people don't even realize that's happening?
Exactly. They'll say they didn't think it was an emergency or they thought someone else would help.
So even when it's something as serious as helping someone in need, we can be totally unaware of what's influencing us.
Right. It's like we need to believe that we're making our own choices, that we're rational.
It's like we have this need to protect our image of ourselves, even if it's not totally accurate.
That's a good way to put it. Nisbett and Wilson are saying that this need for a coherent story about ourselves might actually get in the way of us seeing things clearly.
Wow, this is some heavy stuff.
It is.
So what's the bottom line? What did they conclude from all this?
They basically concluded that we often don't really know why we think or do the things we do. And when we're asked to explain ourselves, we fall back on these pre-existing ideas, these theories about how things work.
So instead of actually looking inside, we're just grabbing explanations from our culture, our experiences, stuff like that.
Exactly. And that can lead us to totally misinterpret our own motivations.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much we can trust what people say about themselves.
Right. It's like, can we really believe what people say in therapy or when they're explaining why they bought something?
That's a big question. And it has implications for all sorts of fields like therapy, marketing, even just our everyday relationships.
So how does this affect therapy?
Well, if people aren't always reliable when they talk about themselves, therapists have to be really good at reading between the lines.
Oh, I see. They can't just take what the client says at face value.
Right. And in marketing, if people don't know why they buy things, marketers need to find other ways to figure out what's really motivating them.
So it's like the old ways of doing things might not work so well anymore.
Exactly. Traditional market research might miss the mark.
So basically, Nisbett and Wilson are saying we need to be a little more humble about what we know.
Yeah.
And maybe not jump to conclusions so quickly about why people do things.
I think that's a good takeaway. They're saying that the human mind is way more complicated than we think it is. We don't always know what's going on in there.
That's for sure. But that doesn't mean we should just give up, right?
Of course not. It just means we need to keep asking questions, keep researching, and keep trying to understand ourselves better.
This has been a really thought-provoking discussion. It's kind of scary to think we might not know ourselves as well as we thought, but it's also kind of a relief to know that we're not always in control.
I think so, too. It takes some of the pressure off.
So for our listeners, if you're feeling a little confused after this episode, that's totally normal. This stuff is deep.
It is.
But don't worry. Just keep exploring, keep learning, and keep listening to Podcog.
We'll keep trying to make sense of it all together.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So before the break, we were talking about how sometimes, even when we think we're being introspective, we might actually just be repeating what we've learned from our culture.
Exactly. We're not really looking inward, just sort of echoing what we've been taught. And they actually dive into research from different areas to illustrate this point even further.
Oh, interesting. Like what kind of research?
Well, they talk about these studies on subliminal perception, where people are influenced by things they're not even aware of seeing or hearing.
Yeah.
And that really highlights the power of these unconscious influences, right? Things we're not even aware of are shaping our thoughts and behavior.
It's pretty wild when you think about it. Like, there's this whole other level of stuff happening in our brains that we have absolutely no access to.
Exactly. And it really challenges the idea that we're fully in control of our thoughts and actions.
Right. Makes you wonder, are we really the ones making the decisions, or are we just along for the ride?
Exactly. They also bring up Mayer's classic problem-solving experiment. It's from 1931, the one with the chords.
Oh, yeah. Remind me what that was about.
Okay, so you have these people, and they're in a room, and they have to figure out how to tie these two chords together. There are all these different objects in the room they can use, and most people, they struggle at first,
Yeah, it sounds tricky.
But then Mayer, the experimenter, he subtly hints at the solution.
Okay, so he kind of nudges them in the right direction.
Right. And a lot of them, they figure it out after the hint. But here's the thing.
What happens when they're asked to explain how they solved it?
That's the crazy part. Most of them completely fail to recognize that the hint helped them. They actually think they just came up with the solution on their own through their own brilliance.
Wow, that's amazing. So even when we're actively trying to solve a problem, we might not be aware of the things that actually helped us get there.
Exactly. It's like our minds are always looking for an explanation, and if we don't know the real reason, we just come up with a story that sounds plausible.
So we're basically just telling ourselves stories all the time, even when we think we're being logical and rational.
Pretty much, yeah. And the crazy thing is, those stories, those narratives we create, they can be really convincing, even to ourselves.
That makes sense. I can definitely see how that would happen. So what other research do they talk about?
Well, they also get into Latan and Durley's work on bystander intervention.
Yeah, the bystander effect, right?
Yeah.
Where people are less likely to help someone in need when there are a lot of other people around.
Right, exactly. And what's fascinating is that people often deny that this is happening. When you ask them if the presence of others influenced their decision to help, they'll often say no.
Really? So they're not even aware that they're being influenced by the people around them.
It seems that way. They'll say things like, "Oh, I didn't think it was an emergency," or "I thought someone else was already helping."
So even when it comes to something as serious as helping another person, we might be totally blind to the social pressures that are shaping our actions.
Exactly. It's like there's this deep-seated need to believe that we're in control, that we're making our own choices, that we're rational. Maybe it's a way of protecting our sense of self?
Yeah, I can see that. It's like we need to believe that we're good people who would help others in need, so we kind of block out any evidence to the contrary.
That's a really insightful way to put it, and I think that's part of what Nisbett and Wilson are getting at. This idea that our need to have a positive and consistent self-image can actually get in the way of seeing things clearly.
Wow, this is really making me think. So putting it all together, what were the main takeaways from the paper? What were Nisbett and Wilson's big conclusions?
Well, they essentially conclude that we often don't have direct access to the reasons behind our judgments and actions. And when we're asked to explain ourselves, we rely on these, pre-existing theories about how things work, these causal theories.
So instead of truly looking inward, we're sort of looking outward to our culture, our experiences, our general understanding of the world, and pulling explanations from there.
Exactly. We're not really introspecting. We're more like storytellers, constructing narratives that make sense to us.
And as we've been talking about, those stories aren't always accurate reflections of what's really going on.
Right. And that means we can end up misinterpreting our own motivations and actions, which has, pretty big implications for a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes you wonder about the reliability of self-reporting in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we can't always trust what people say about their own thoughts and feelings, how does that affect things like therapy, marketing, even just our everyday conversations with other people?
Exactly. And I think those are questions that researchers are still grappling with today.
Wow. Well, this has been a truly fascinating and thought-provoking discussion.
It has.
Nisbett and Wilson's work is definitely a game changer. It challenges a lot of assumptions about how our minds work.
It does. And it reminds us that the human mind is a lot more complex and mysterious than we often give it credit for.
For sure. And it leaves us with a lot to think about.
It does. But that's the beauty of science, right? It keeps us asking questions, keeps us pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
Absolutely. Well, to our listeners, if you're feeling a little mind blown after this episode, that's perfectly normal. This research really makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. But don't worry, that's a good thing. Embrace the uncertainty, stay curious, and keep exploring the fascinating world of cognitive neuroscience with us here on Podcog.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Podcog. As graduate students passionate about cognitive neuroscience, we're excited to bring you the latest well-researched insights in the field. But we can't do it alone. Your support, whether by subscribing, sharing with friends, or offering a small contribution, helps us cover production costs and continue bringing you new episodes. Please consider subscribing and supporting us so we can keep exploring the fascinating science behind human behavior together.